African Studies lecture series. We are very happy to welcome our second guest, Dr. Lioba Moshi from University of Georgia, who's going to have a more formal introduction in a moment. We're starting a few minutes behind schedule, but what we're hoping for is about an hour of formal remarks by Dr. Lioba Moshi, followed by about a half an hour of questions from the audience. There is coffee and tea and refreshments in the back that we hope you'll be able to stay and socialize for a few minutes after the talk. And if there are interested undergraduates who would like to talk with Dr. Moshi a little more informally, from 2:30 to 3, we have this space, and we would encourage you to stay and chat with her. With that said, Dr. Jeff Magato is going to do a more formal introduction of Dr. Moshi. So thank you all for coming today.
Thank you all for coming. As you know, we're really honored and privileged to have Dr. Lioba Moshi here with us. I'm going to do a little bit of context setting before I talk about Dr. Moshi's qualifications and extensive experiences. Because I wanted to first maybe begin with how she got here, which is, as with great visitors at the U of O, it's a combination of the efforts of a lot of people, particularly the African Studies Committee, Center for Study of Women in Society, and my host unit, the Yamada Language Center, but particularly our Swahili language instructor, Marco Mwipopo, who's sitting right there. Because it was Marco who 2 years ago said, we've had a Swahili language program now for about 5 years at the U of O. It's really time that we brought somebody in who could help us think about not only where we are, but where we'd like the Swahili language program to go as an integral component of African studies at the U of O. And it wasn't hard to decide who we should invite, because Dr. Moshi's career has been about going to a large state public institution where African studies was not a significant part of the curriculum, and starting from, I don't know, from scratch, but starting with not very much, has built it into an African Studies Institute, which she's been the director of for many years. No longer, though, correct? Step down. Every administrator has to have an exit plan. I've learned that. And, frankly, one of the reasons we've invited her here is to learn from that extensive experience now over 20 years. So we feel like we're still, at the infant stage. African studies, we've got about a decade of history, and people like Dr. Doris Payne sitting to my left there have been here a lot longer than that and have been advocating for it for a lot longer than that. But I think the synergies of a language program, an area studies program, a good study abroad program, those are the things that we're going to be talking about while Dr. Moshi's here. For those of you who have students in African studies, I pay you a particular welcome, and I know you don't have a chance every day, although this term it's been every week. For the last 2 weeks we've had a speaker, so that's kind of a remarkable and special time. So thank you for coming. I just want to, finish with one thing that Dr. Moshi just shared with me, that the history of language teaching and area studies programs is a pretty happy one, but they do kind of go like this. And I hope that what we're going to hear today, both in her talk and then in comments afterwards, is an example of what I hope we're moving towards, where language, culture, area studies, linguistics, they don't become silos or separate places where people go and only do those things, but they become a common area, a sitting ground for people who are interested in Africa, in this, particularly today, East Africa, to find common ground and to work together. Because we'll never have the numbers to be something else. We have to work together, and that's why we're just delighted to have Dr. Moshi. Thank you.
First of all, let me say thank you so much for inviting me. I don't think I deserve this honor, but I take it. And if I look or feel dazed, just know that I just came from the country of Athens. The capital city is University of Georgia. And I just arrived at this country of Colorado, the capital city of Eugene. And I think I qualify now to be the running mate for Mr. Kane, who wants to be the president for the Republican side. This is just a joke. You caught that. Good. So you're awake. Not Uzbekistan. Anyway, I really appreciate being here. As he said, the road to establishing African studies and African languages is not easy. For me, it's like climbing Kilimanjaro. Anybody's been there? I have students who climb every year, and when they come down, they say, halfway they say, why do I have to pay to climb this mountain? And I tell them, because you want to climb and see what's up there. And so for those of us who want to see Africa be a part of the curriculum of studies, not only in the United States, but globally, we have to climb Kilimanjaro. No way out. And I hope all of you who are here are committed to do that, because you cannot do it half-heartedly. You have to do it with commitment. And you have us to call and say, pull us up, even if it means starting a contribution, a basket collection. We should do that. There's no need, we shouldn't do that. When Doris asked me to come and talk, to give a talk, in addition to visiting on campus, the first thing I thought was, yeah, I'll go talk about linguistics, because that's my area. But then she later said, we need to weave in some stuff about gender. And I said, okay, I will try to do that. But then I thought, since I'm talking to people from different fields, I'm not going to make it a statistics and charts and all that, but rather make it a personal discussion. And I'm going to give you some personal stuff about me and my family, and then I will move on to where I see language has contributed to the way I see or perceive things. And then I hope at the end of it, you will ask me specific questions from your own area that bear towards the topic. I will start by saying that when I was 11 years old, my father asked me why I wanted to go to a boarding school. I suppose he wanted to see what I was thinking about my future. And I'll tell you why my father would ask me such a question in a few minutes. I responded, I want to be like you. And then I said, I don't want to live the life of my mother. Of course, as an 11-year-old, I didn't think I was insulting my mother. I thought I was just being truthful. And people know me. I just tell it like it is. And I have a niece, actually, who's like me, and I'm so happy. For me, it was more of a reaction to the comparison between what my mother, a homemaker, did and how she did it. And my father, who was a teacher, a grade school teacher, and what he did, how he moved around the house, how he came in and left and came back again. My father was not a person who discriminated. He believed in gender equality, and I'll tell you why he became that kind of a person. He did not discriminate between the chores that the boys and girls performed in the house. But I still felt there was something that was not quite right, but I did not know what it was. I thought if I had education and I was a teacher like my father, I will be immune to the things I thought were not right. I did not like the fact that my mother and my grandmother thought the world of my brothers, and even though I was younger than two of them, I still waited on them more than they waited on me. Granted, I had some perks and benefits because I was the firstborn girl. And in my culture, the firstborn girl was the mother of the father. So I was at the same level as my grandmother. So a lot of respect had to come from my father to me. And my father treated me and my sister, we were the only two girls in a family of 11. So my father treated us with lots of favor. We were the two who always got a new dress at the end of the month. When he went downtown to get his salary, something came back, and we were the recipients. And the boys would look at us and say, yeah, the same again. But my father also did something. He constantly reminded me and my sister that the world did not treat women right, that the world was not kind to women. And for me, I wondered why he always said that. And as I grew older, I now realize that he was warning me, unless you do good in your school, then you're in trouble. So that was a good incentive for working hard at school. As I grew older, I was curious about my father, and especially his background. I asked him about his mother. His mother was the fourth wife to my grandfather. And also my grandmother was abducted. She was cutting grass for her mother's cows, and she was abducted from the field and was brought to my grandfather as the fourth wife. And this was because my grandfather's father, the chief of the village, wanted her to be my grandfather's fourth wife. There was an additional motive to this. There were quite a lot of cattle raised between the chiefdoms. And this was the best way to forge some kind of immunity, either through marriage or bloodline. And so by bringing my grandmother to the family, those two chiefdoms, because my grandmother also came from a chiefdom, would not be fighting each other. And it worked. It also minimized the fact that we will continue marrying from each other. That's the end of it, because we have bloodline in the family. Shortly after, my grandmother had a son. That was my father. And then later, my aunt. So my grandfather said, hooray, that's it. You have a son, you have a daughter, that's it. I'm done with children. My grandmother protested because her co-wives had between 5 and 8 children. And she wanted as many children because, you know, children were assets. Children were flags in your compound that showed that you were somebody. But my grandfather said, that's it. And my grandfather did not want to have more children because between the 4 wives, he already had 15. And he was not about to go look for more land for these sons and grandsons. And so it remained that way. And my grandmother once told me that she was the livestock of the compound because her co-wives thought she was less than them because they had more children, and she was last to come into the community. This environment kind of created some sort of a special social island for my grandmother and her kids, her 2 children, my father and my aunt. And she protected them like a hawk because she did not want to have anything happen to them because my grandfather had declared no more children. She specifically paid attention to my father because it was my father who gave her the right to remain in the compound. My father was the heir. And without my father, she can be sent away any day, especially if my grandfather died and his brothers will divide the land amongst themselves. So my father grew up knowing, he later said, growing up knowing that he needed to protect his mother because he felt that there was an imbalance. There were fewer, there were more. And he also took great responsibility in taking care of his sister because those were the 2 women that were central in his life. And so I can understand why he so protected my sister and I, because he already had that framework and knew how vulnerable we were in the society. I also learned that my father would never have gone to school if it was not for my grandmother. Neither my grandfather nor his brothers went to school. Naturally, they did not think it was necessary. They were children of the chief. They had everything, lots of land, lots of cows, a lot of wealth. But when missionaries came to the village during colonial time, the colonial administration required that all kids should go to school. So my father and the other kids in the village enrolled in the primary school in the village. But there was no requirement that the kids should go to school after the 4th grade. 4th grade was, I've had enough education, do whatever you can with it. You know how to read and write. You can do some administrative work at the clerk's office and so forth. But the missionaries also selected the best and the brightest to go to teacher education. And this meant you had to leave home and go to a boarding school. My father was one of those who were chosen in this group of 5 kids to go to a teacher training school. But my grandfather was not going to let that happen. First of all, they needed money to pay for the tuition. And so he told my father that he had enough work on the farm, and besides, he had his mother and his sister take care of. What is this nonsense with the white man? My grandmother took this as yet another way to put her down. And being the Maasai woman she was, she told my father that he should get ready to go to school because she was going to see to it that he did go to school. And so she sold one of her cows and got enough money for my father's tuition and pocket money for the school. But when my grandfather heard of it, he said, this is too much money. Just give him half of what you got. Knowing that half will not allow him into the school, so the missionaries will send him back home. But my grandmother said, the cow was mine. I fed it. I sold it. The money is going with my son. And so my father went to school and became a teacher. And I'm grateful because it was the foundation that he got from the school that probably transformed our family, and particularly for my sister and I to have the opportunity to see beyond the 4th grade, because my mother ended up with 4th grade. In fact, she was in the same class as my father. But she was pulled out to go and help around the house in the village. And there are 2 reasons why she was pulled out. First of all, she was a woman. And it was also, secondly, it was considered a waste of resources to send a woman to school because you're educating somebody for someone else. They're not going to be in your family. So my mother did not go beyond 4th grade, but 2 of her brothers were educated and became postal workers. My mother had 2 sisters. They too did not go to school beyond grade school and 4th grade. My father also had a sister I told you earlier about. She did not go to school beyond the 4th grade either. And I wondered why Grandma didn't vouch for her as well. But for the same reason, my mother didn't go to school beyond the 4th grade. But out of guilt, my father took my aunt's children in and paid for their school fee, for their education for the entire time. So, why this reflection? This reflection comes to me from time to time because I revisit my childhood and look at where I am right now and try to figure out what I saw then and what I see now, what my place in society was then and what my place in society is now. Before I went to school, I thought my father's name was Papa. Swahili Baba, English father. And my mother's name was Mama, which is in Swahili, Mama as well, and Mom in English. But I saw these 2 names as titles that described who these individuals were in the society and what their place and responsibilities were. Papa was prestigious, while Mama was not. Papa could say anything he liked, go anywhere, anytime, and return anytime he wished. Mama had to be available at all times, come rain or shine, and had to always go an extra mile to make things work. There was a lot of power associated with the term Papa. For Mama, needed only say, wait until your Papa comes home. And chaos will turn into peace and tranquility. Acting up would immediately end, and good behavior would be restored immediately. It also amuses me now when I think back, when my father came back from school and asked us, what did your mom do today? And we would say, nothing. Because there was no measure of what she did. We knew Papa went to school to teach, which was work. And he came back with stuff for us, like clothes, shoes, school supplies. Mama never gave us anything. Not to forget that Papa bought bread every time he went to town to get his paycheck. And occasionally on Friday we had fried liver, which was a delicatessen for us. But Mama couldn't afford all that. So Mama, yeah, Mama. But Papa had power. Papa was powerful. I was also very curious of Papa's activities, and I very liked his briefcase, because it was always full. So from time to time when he was not looking, I would sneak in and see what was in there. And I saw all these books, and I looked through all these books. And I was tempted. I saw the pens and pencils, and I took one pen, and I looked at one book with a lot of spaces. I drew anything I liked in all those free pages. And my father saw that. I thought, well, he's going to be mad at this. But he gave me supplies to go and draw and write whatever I wanted to do. And again, something which plays back to me now, to see, he noticed that at least I have a path for this one. Maybe there is hope. So this brings me to what I really wanted to talk to you about. That I think everything begins with language and ends with language. Nothing can be studied fully when language issues are not taken into consideration. Since the way we use language establishes history and provides us with knowledge that makes us what we are. So whatever we hear, we don't just hear it, we associate it with a lot of things. So when I heard Papa, I had other things that I associated with the term Papa, not just that this is a man who is my father. It is through language that we get to know and understand who is who, their status, and their esteemed places in society and culture. So Moshi 1997 indicated that society grants men a superior status in all major aspects of social structures. And it is by design because it is expected that we do that. Another colleague of mine and her counterpart in Botswana did a study and noted that in Botswana society, women are considered a child. She is the child of the father or the child of her husband. And if she's not married, she is the child of her brother or of her uncle. And if she's not married but has a child, the children becomes her father's children. And in many societies, even in my culture, that happens too. And she is reduced to be the sister of these children. Again, Mama is just something there. But Papa is very, very important. So if Papa was around, none of this would be done. So examples like this serve to illustrate the manifestation of gender differentiation that is found not only in African languages, but in many of the languages of the world too. So some of you can also come up with examples from your own languages that you work on or speak. So language is the perfect vehicle for showing gender differences based on cultural norms. And examples of such manifestation can be found in the lexicon and also in the grammar. Another scholar, Sally McConnell, and also Kay, note that the place we occupy in our various cultures and societies reflects the social divisions that we, both men and women, not just men or not just women, have helped to create through our actions and language practices. And because of the power of language, they stay. They never go anywhere. They stay and stay stronger for a long, long time. And I was telling, I think someone else, must have been, perhaps I was talking to Lisa this morning, that from time to time, I find myself saying he when I mean she. And I don't make mistakes with she, because I know she. But everything else is he. So someone will say, did you mean he? We're talking about her. Oh, yeah, I meant her. And it's because of the perceptions that have been part and parcel of my psyche. So if the activity or the event or the reference does not really pertain to the cultural norms that I have so much endured in my brain, reflect a she, I will automatically assume it's a he and then correct myself. So both social and gender roles are acquired at the same time as language and other social cultural norms. And this is, and as I said earlier, once you acquire them, it's very difficult to lose them. For those of you who teach language, you know that if you teach a student a language, they go away for the semester, they come back, they have forgotten quite a bit of it. But if you get the student to acquire the language, just like a child acquires the language, start with mama and build up and all that, it stays. And you don't lose that easily. The same thing with the practices and perceptions that we acquire. So Commeyras and Montis again did some research in Botswana, and they talked to some young people. And they asked them whether they would like to one day wake up in the morning and be the other, be the opposite gender. And none of them wanted to do that. And you would assume, if I think that men have more privileges than I have, well, I'll be a man, I'll get all these privileges. And for a man who wants to not have to deal with all the required and the force that we put on them to perform on certain aspects, they say, well, I'd like to be there and get rid of all this. But none of them wanted to change their gender. Commeyras and Montis explained their unwillingness as a result of the participants' perception of what the other sex is, can or cannot do, and the privileges accorded or denied as a consequence of their gender. Each saw the advantages and disadvantages, but they were not willing to change their roles. Another scholar who's looked at some of these aspects notes that in the process of learning a language, we also learn to classify, to group things together. And we manage the world in accordance with those social orders. And we try to make sense of the world based on that. And since we have established all that, we are not willing to go and start all over again and remap a whole new world. And so perhaps that explains why the Botswana kids were happy with who they were and were more willing to make sense of the world based on what they have already stored and acquired. And because of this, it is also true to say that once we have established a way of looking at things, even if we can do things differently, we stick to only the way that we have programmed ourselves to do that. And yes, percent as early as, did I go too fast? As early as 1920s, had a historical account of the development of gender differences in language used by the Carib Indians in Lesser Antilles. And those of you who work in that area may be aware of this historical account. But from what the short version of it I have is that he knows that when the Caribs came to the island, they found the Oak tribe. They killed the men and married the women. And then after that, men and women developed distinct speeches, despite the fact that they got rid of the men, but the new offsprings, they developed two different speeches. The girls only learned the feminine speeches. The boys developed the male speeches, or speech patterns. Despite the fact that the boys could understand and could perform with the feminine, patterns, they never did that. But there was a conscious effort to conform to only the distinct social and cultural rules that kept the two genders distinct. And again, the forces that are within that society, and in any society we can think of, oftentimes become the force that makes each remain in their own category regardless. And I think that also contributes to the understanding of what Commeyras found out in their research. Back to Africa, the Mukama, 1995, made also a comparable claim from a variety of Bantu languages in sub-Saharan Africa, and noted that in many of these Bantu languages, there were prestigious language use, which was specifically for men, and there was the less prestigious or non-prestigious language use, which was for the women. So if you wanted to be in the upper D class, business, arbitration, and serious deliberation, you had to use the male version of the language. And I think that's true also in many languages, including our developed Western worlds. And I did a little bit of investigating to see what perceptions we get based on what we use. And I used 3 languages, Swahili, which is the national language of Tanzania, and Kenya. Sorry, Kenyans, didn't put you there. But it is now. It used to be official, but not national. No wars here, okay? And Kichaga, which is for speakers who live around Mount Kilimanjaro, and I'm a speaker of that. That's my first language. And then Kikerewe, mostly spoken on the island on Lake Victoria. First examples from Kiswahili. We have the word mwanamke, literally child of woman or child of wife. Then you have mwanamume, child of husband or male. And the roles are described based on these titles. Girls always gravitate towards the roles the mother does or carries, and father likewise. I was telling my students on Tuesday in class that the word mchumba, chumba is room. And by putting you personifies it and makes it fiancé. So what has fiancé got to do with room? They asked. And I said precisely. What is a room? A room is an area in the house that has been designated for something. So if you're given that space, then that's your room for a specific reason, for you, nobody else. So if you bring someone else there, this person better be somebody special. So if a young man has reached age 16, the father has to start helping him build a house of his own, because it is time to have mchumba. You cannot bring your mchumba to your father's house because you have no space in there. And so this element of training also goes with the selection of terms that are used with respect to the roles that you're going to perform. And I told my students also that when you talk about mchumba, we always think of male. With females, yeah, it's secondary, but not primary, because girls are usually not given rooms. Girls stay with their mother until they leave the house to get married and get your own room in your mchumba's house, whatever place you go. And therefore, these terms do stay with the roles and enhance the perception of what it is the cultural and social roles are. Mzee means elder, but generally associated with men. Actually, presidents of countries are called mzee as a term of status. My former president, Nyerere, the first president of Tanzania, when he was maybe 30 or something, they were calling him Mzee Nyerere, which means elder, a man of respect, a man of stature. But if you call a woman Mzee who is not actually Mzee, you're in big trouble. Because for a woman, you have to say Mama Mzee, a mother, woman, old, and they better be old. So Mzee for a woman has something to do with age and out of importance. You need to go to the back. We don't need you anymore. But for a young man, you attain that title of Mzee, you will be the one leading. You have the powers now. You have, we say you have had enough salt in your body. We can trust you to do great things. Kuoa, to marry. This is plus active voice, and it's only male. Women don't marry. Women get married, which is passive. And so, and I think I told someone else, I think Lisa again this morning, we had a good chat this morning. I told Lisa a story this morning. I have two very vibrant kids, not my kids, my brother's kids, my nephew and my niece, both born in the United States, but we're trying to raise them in the culture, both cultures. And one morning and during breakfast, I asked what they wanted to be. My nephew said he wanted to be the president of the United States. I said, go, Bahati. We're going to call you President Bahati or something. He said, yeah. I said, can I be your vice president? He said, no. I said, why? He said, because you're too old. So I said, who's going to be your vice president? He named a friend of the family, Mr. Giles, who is 70 years old. And I said, he is old too. He said, yeah, but he's a man. And then my niece was anxious. She wanted also to tell what she was going to be. But I was blown off my chair when she said, when I grow up, I want a wife. And I said, you want what? I want a wife. And her brother said, no, you can't. And she said, why not? She said, because you're a woman, you will have a husband. I can have a wife, but you can only have a wife. And she said, no, I can have a wife too. And I didn't say anything at the table because I didn't want to disappoint her. I only said, you can be whatever you want to be. And she said, that's right. But later I said to her mother, she probably sees what husband and wife mean by your relationship. There are some privileges that the husband is getting that the wife is not getting. That's why she doesn't want to have any of that. And I was there a long time ago. So you must want to do something about that. So in that respect, then you can see where this marrying and being married, the implications of that. You get married, that means you have to have the passive voice in the structure. And this little 5-year-old has already noticed that she does not want to be the passive one. She wants to be the active one. A few more examples on Kichaga, and she's telling me she wants you to ask me more questions rather than me going on this. Oh, okay, okay. In my first language, it is a little bit more different from Swahili. A female parent is called mfe, the one who gives birth. And from talking to my grandmother, men are never to be seen anywhere when a woman is having birth. Actually, his friends take him to drink. And they bring him home drunk. And they say, the child is here. Oh, okay. What child? A son. Okay. That's the end of the story. So he has someone to administer, but it has nothing to do with the rest of it. Wife is mka, and also it means ka, sit, be below, beneath. So pretty much in the same perception of marrying and to be married. Husband is me, high on the top, and it's also a fire amber. So you are the power in this relationship. Mdumi, only men, great accomplished men, but there's no female equivalent because there are we don't know anything a woman has accomplished, so we don't have any term for that. Also, another term for men. This is almost equivalent to the one you saw earlier, mzee. But if you did something with courage, with force, with stamina, people will say, oh, you are msoro. And, you know, my grandmother would say, yeah, you did it like msoro. Not you were msoro, you did it like. So that it doesn't crush your ego. Yeah, good, you did it, but you're not there. You just like. A person of strength with masculinity is mndu plus msoro. You have to, a person of strength. It has to reinforce that. And it's only strictly male. Do I need to say much? Absent-minded, invisible. Remember we had mama mzee. It's just your time is out. So the same thing with Kichaga. They see this as now you're invisible, should be invisible. Meku, old man, also reputable elder, and men refer to each other in beer parlors. Yeah, you can buy a lot of beer, you become meku because you have money, you have the power. But it's strictly for men. Child of man, just like Swahili. Child of woman. And the same thing with marry, have a term for men and a term for women, which also, with the O is the passive marker in Kichaga. So it shows the passive voice. These are examples from Kikerewe. They have specific age limits for kids in Kikerewe. So a boy will be called Omusigazi until their 18th birthday. After that, it is demeaning to call him that. You call him Omuseza. So they have stages. And then before they are married, you can call the Omutamba. And then when he is 50 years old, 50 years or above, Omuguruso. But you have, look at the change in age. For the girl is Omuharakazi. That means of marrying age. Omukazi, an adult female. Omusimbe, unmarried adult female. Omukekuru, an old woman. Keku, it's almost also in many of the Bantu language they have keku as old or older. And look at the age of an old woman, 45 years. I'll probably be triple old or something. I don't know. In Sesotho, Segametsi, given to a girl, which means errand girl, no male equivalent. Kigosi, chief, no female equivalent. Modisa, head boy, no female equivalent. Which means that these terms are specifically given based on the roles these individuals are going to assume in the society and in their own culture. And it brings me to this comment by these scholars that a woman's identity is through that of others, daughter of or wife of. That is the most important part. The other titles are really not as important as long as they are daughter of somebody or wife of somebody. That is more important in the cultures. And how much more do I have? Okay. So I will say with those examples that, and perhaps we can bring up some more stuff during the Q&A, that when these roles are associated with the terms of reference, we create roles that are taboo for specific groups. You cannot cross the line of demarcation from your corner to the other corner. And this is clear perhaps in one of the implications that I got from Capigens and early 1999 when they were writing about Somali women, that not that men and women can be distinguished through the limitations in civil rights and positions in leadership roles. They noted that women's rights and responsibilities under Somali customary law, and some of you who are doing research in the area might be familiar with this, are married by the apparent mediation from a male kin, father, husband, or uncle or brother. None of the females are included in this. For example, a woman's right to establish a house requires validation by a male overseer. Also, this brings us to the silencing, which I talked about earlier on. An overt and covert prohibition of voice in the presence of superordinates. Silencing, and some of you have done some work in this, is a way of giving, your rights to somebody else to speak for you. And for the Somali women, their rights have been taken away and given to someone else, and therefore have been reduced to being silent. You could say that, well, those problems are being now eradicated by the quest for democracy and more rights for women and so forth. But my contention is that, yes, on paper, it might look so. But what is already engraved in our minds, in our perception, is going to take a much longer time to get rid of. In fact, it's not only the opposite side that enforces and reinforces them, but both sides do, consciously and sometimes subconsciously. And I will end with a problem that another scholar talked about, which is associated with institutionalization. And in simple things like names. Simmons took issue with the loss of identity through institutionalized naming practices. She raised many questions about her own identity. 4 names given to her at different times of her life. She has Nkweto Achalinda. She was given that at her birth. Then Nora was given to her by her father. Mfula was an additional name given by her father to further identify her, patrilineage. And Simmons signals that she's married to Mr. Simmons. And we have about 5 problems with this. The first problem she realized was that Mfula only emphasizes her patrilineage, even though the Abemba society, which she lived in, was matrilineal. But still, perception of male, female, it went to her father's line. So the consequence are that she's denied her matrilineal line. That has never figured in her identity. So she is not connected to her feminine side. Then the second problem is Nkweto Achalinda, which was from her grandfather sides of the family. And the consequences of that is gender marked, very male, and indicates a generational gap. Then comes problem number 3, Nora, which is Christian, and was given to her by her father to counter the grandfather's pagan name, because her father was Christian. And the consequences, it reinforced the Christianity, an element of colonialism, and the beginning of institutionalization of identity. There was also an unspoken superiority complex associated with adopting English names because they carry more prestige, and creates a 2-tier system I always tease my Asian students when they tell me their name is Laura or Jolie or Judy. I say, is that your Chinese or Korean name? Say, no, 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 that's the name that Americans can pronounce. Problem number 4, Felicitas, was given as a baptismal name also to symbolize conversion, requirement of 2 names. So she was given 2 names. The consequence, a temporal name, because she is no longer in the faith. She's no longer a Christian. So she wonders what she needs to do with this name. Problem number 5, Simmons, which symbolizes patrilineage, her husband's male naming identity. Consequence, she lost of both cultures, the cultural and professional identity, and the idea that that may change several times depending on situations, such as divorce. And also the creation of name stringing. So if you marry 5 times, then you go keep maintaining all these names. So Simmons questions that. And I think it's a problem that most of modern day women face. Something my mother didn't have to deal with or my grandmother didn't have to deal with. But the women in my generation and later, all of them found it was prestigious to be Mrs. Somebody. If they are not Mrs. Somebody, there's something missing. And you would wonder why we all make all this noise about women equality and all that. And yet we complain again and say, why is this happening? And then we subscribe to the same. I don't see why it should take anything out of anybody by remaining with their name if they have committed relationship with somebody else. But it is part of the psyche that we have. It is what we have ingrained in our psyche that it is proper and cultural for us. We have to assume a certain role, cultural and social role, by identifying ourselves as such. And I will end it at that.
I was actually wondering about, you talked about how certain words are only in the domain of men or women, and you talked a little bit about some words being words that men use around business and that we associate importance with that. And I wonder about, when I was in Kenya last summer, I heard a lot of code switching and mixing of English with Swahili. And I wonder if code switching is something that are foreign languages thought to be more the domain of one gender or the other, and how does it work as we integrate new words into a language?
Again, I will have to look at what was code switched and the context in which they were code switched in order for me to pass judgment on them. But my hunch is that if I hear something, I'm probably going to parse it. And whatever hits me first is probably going to stick. And so depending on how deep my perception one way, gender-wise, is than the other, I will go by that. And I think that's perhaps what is my biggest problem in he-she identification. Yes.
Thank you very much, Dr. Moshi. Very interesting talk, but also very personal one. And I'm wondering, in your lived experiences here in the United States, or your other colleagues, women from Africa, I'm wondering about, how we have lived, how we have grown up, and yet our psyche is still woman of stature, a professional, a professor, a director, how does that affect your lived experiences here? And do you find yourself questioning yourself about how people perceive you or how people treat you? Do you sometimes question yourself, is it because I'm a woman? Is it because I'm an African woman? Because once in a while that does come through, and I'm wondering whether you have anything to say about that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
When I was younger, as a graduate student, I sometimes went to my apartment and cried and tried to wonder. Well, I wonder if I was a man, whether this would have happened. And then I say, I wonder if I was not African, this would have happened. And then I realized that was not the best way to go. And I wanted to be more like my grandmother. You confront every problem as it comes, and you describe and prescribe to you what you think you are and what you can be. But I do agree, it is a problem. For example, going to the dean's office, and this is an assumed dean, male, who's been in the army in the United States. And I show up and I have a string of complaints about my program, and I want you to do this, and I want you to do that, and I want you to do that. And I wouldn't be surprised if you say, yeah, we'll think about it. And that's all he was going to say. I wouldn't be surprised. But I can go back and say, I wonder. But I'm not going to go and say, I wonder. I'm going to say, okay, he said he will think about it. Give you time. Think about it. And then I'm coming back and say, you said you're thinking about it. What's the answer? He might say, I'm still thinking about it. I say, thank you. I'll go and come again. Have you thought about it? I'll be a menace. And I know a doctor who is a friend of the family who here in the United States who treated my father when he came here and had a sudden stroke said to me, your father is a very determined person. In English, stubborn. And I said, and his daughter is also determined. And in English, stubborn. Because he wanted me to take my father to a nursing home, and I say, in our culture, we don't do that. And he said, it's going to be overwhelming. You cannot deal with it. And I say, when I can't, I'll come and tell you. And I took my father home, and in the short end of the story, he recovered in a week, and he was walking by himself. So, yes, you will have those feelings. There are times I feel the same way when I'm dealing with my brothers. They're younger than me. They come to my house and they tell me, you should do this, you should do this, you should fix it, fix it. And I said, okay, I've been here so many years. You just go here. And already you're telling me, do this, do that, do this, that. How did you know all about that? But I think for them, it's the man attitude. They have to approach things with immediacy. They have to be in control. They have to get things done, get things fixed, and so forth. And they want to tell me also that I need that support. I was going to talk about issues of vulnerability. There is a perception that women are vulnerable, and that's why earlier when I gave you the example from Commeyras, who said in Botswana, women are treated as equal to children. And like I said, I was going to be very personal in this talk. When my father died in 2007, at the reading of his will, I found out that he had assigned me my little brother to take care of me. And at the moment, I'm paying school fees for this dear little brother. And I said, who is supporting who now? But in my father's mind, he was looking at when I become one of these terms. Mzee, mama mzee, omkeku, invisible, insane, over there. You need someone to hold your hand. And so this is the only person who can do it. And also I recall what my father had said earlier on, the world is never kind to women. So all those things were in my father's mind when he was writing all this will. Granted, you know, like I said, my father never discriminated. He gave me land, actually gave me more land than he gave his sons. But he made sure he told somebody, this is the size of the land I'm giving my daughter. Make sure nobody touches it. And he called my brother and said, this is the land I gave to your sister. Anybody who touches this will see me in hell. So again, in his psyche, he saw the vulnerability of his girls. And they needed to be taken care of. And so my brothers have every right to say, yeah, we told we should take care of you. Daddy said, so that's what we're going to do. So there is this element. You kind of wonder, when am I going to be able to speak for myself? When am I going to be able to stand on my own 2 feet without feeling this perceived vulnerability? And my little niece who wants to marry, who wants a wife, he wants to be the one who is not vulnerable, but someone else should take her place and be the vulnerable one.